State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert withdraws as details emerged that her nanny was working illegally in the U.S.
Plus, the president's ultimatum to European allies: take 800 plus ISIS captives and put them on trial or risk being released. Just releasing these people.
We begin with the developments out of Chicago and the alleged attack on actor Jussie Smollett.
Now, the gruesome details made national news, but now Smollett's claims are being questioned.
Two law enforcement sources with knowledge of the investigation tell CNN that Chicago police believe actor Jussie Smollett paid two men to orchestrate an assault on him that he reported late last month, an allegation Smollett denies. The men, who are brothers, were arrested Wednesday but released without charges Friday after Chicago police cited the discovery of new evidence. The sources told CNN the two men are now cooperating fully with law enforcement.
Innocence prevailed, all right? My guys are walking home. They're not charged. They are not suspects in this case.
Smollett told authorities he was attacked in late January by two men who were yelling out racial and homophobic slurs. He said one attacker put a rope around his neck and poured an unknown chemical substance on him.
I noticed the rope around my neck and I started screaming. And I said, "There's a rope around my neck."
The sources told CNN there are records that show the two brothers purchased the rope found around Smollett's neck at a hardware store in Chicago. In a statement to CNN, Smollett's attorneys wrote, "As a victim of a hate crime who has cooperated with the police investigation, Jussie Smollett is angered and devastated by recent reports that the perpetrators are individuals he is familiar with. He has now been further victimized by claims attributed to these alleged perpetrators that Jussie played a role in his own attack. Nothing is further from the truth, and anyone claiming otherwise is lying." Smollett claims his attackers referenced President Trump's "Make America Great Again" slogan.
And I see the attacker masked, and he said, "This MAGA country," punches me right in the face. So I punched his back. And then we started tussling. You know, it was very icy.
But he refutes reports that he told police the attackers wore MAGA hats.
I didn't need to add anything like that. They called me a. They called me. There's no which way you cut it. I don't need some MAGA hat as the cherry on top of some racist sundae.
And during the same ABC News interview, he expressed frustration about not being believed.
It feels like if I had said it was a Muslim or a Mexican or someone black, I feel like the doubters would have supported me a lot more. And that says a lot about the place that we are in our country right now.
All right, with us now, CNN legal analyst and criminal defense attorney Joey Jackson, and Brian Stelter, CNN chief media correspondent and anchor of Reliable Sources. Gentlemen, welcome back. And Joey, let me start with you with the legal question. If Smollett paid these men to plan this and he orchestrated this entire thing, detail the legal exposure, the jeopardy he's in.
Victor, good morning to you. Good morning, Brian. The exposure would be significant, and here's why. What happens is that you cannot report something as a crime which is not true. Now, you know, it's one thing in media land to say what you want, do what you want. It's another thing to get the police involved and to suggest that something of this variety happened to you. And the reason that it is such is because there's so many real victims, right? In the event that he's not a victim, we don't know, right? Just like everybody deserves a presumption of innocence, he certainly is entitled to that same presumption. And so assuming, as your question does, that it is not true, it's a class 4 felony. And what that means in English is that you can go to jail for up to 3 years. Now, I wouldn't suspect that that would happen, but what I would suspect is that a prosecutor's office and a judge would give this a very significant weight. And in significant weight, they would really move to prosecute it aggressively. Think about what's happened because of this. We are are in a day and age where, look at the discourse now. The discourse against, what's happening. We have that whole blackface issue in Virginia. We have attacks on immigration in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
It's a very unsettling time. And so this adds to the narrative in not such a good way. And so there's a real problem for law enforcement and for prosecutors to say this is not acceptable, not only because of that, but you divert resources when you're devoting resources to something that's not a crime. And they've had a dozen detectives going out, investigating, executing search warrants,
and it's not like Chicago police don't have other things they can be doing right now, right?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
And so there's so many things that the police really are required to do where the resources could be devoted. So to devote it to this and it's false, it becomes problematic and he becomes in trouble.
So, Brian, let me come to you. What's this mean? Let's put his legal exposure aside, how he's jeopardized his career. He's got music out. He had a performance a week ago. What does this mean for Smollett's future professionally?
Yeah, I checked in with Fox overnight. Fox is the studio that makes Empire as well as the network that broadcasts Empire. They have no new comment about his status. But remember just a couple of days ago when there were rumors that maybe he made this up because he was afraid he was going to lose his spot on the show. So he was trying to get attention, trying to get more publicity. When those rumors came out a couple of days ago, Fox adamantly denied that, said there were no plans to get rid of his character, and said the company absolutely stands by Jussie Smollett. So that was a couple of days ago now. No new comment from Fox. I've got to imagine that this changes the calculus for Fox. But right now, Victor, I think we're in a mystery right now because he has not spoken with the police again. I talked to Chicago PD last night. They said we really need to speak with Jussie Smollett as soon as possible. That's the word from Chicago PD. But because he's brought in a number of lawyers, he came out with a new statement last night that said he's continuing to cooperate. There's a little bit of a standoff, it seems like, between Jussie and the police now about whether he's going to talk to the investigators again, whether he's going to say more about this or not. Frankly, the ball is in his court. And as you said perfectly on Twitter, the real tragedy here is all the victims of real hate crimes whose stories might not be believed in the future. That is what's so scary about this, if indeed he made up this incident.
We're already seeing that narrative coming from people on social media saying that other attacks, other reports, other allegations are fake because this one could be fake. And that is the real tragedy here. Joey, let me come back to you here. Could he face civil action as well? If he had this plan with these two men and, they had this agreement, the fact that they were in custody for 2 days as he continued this facade, if indeed he orchestrated it, could he face something there? Could he face something from Fox, from the producers of the show, and jeopardizing the product?
It's an excellent question, Victor. Let's start with as it relates to the people who were picked up and brought in. Now, understand that they could, in fact, be aiders and abettors to this, and I'm wondering if they were given any immunity whatsoever in terms of giving their story to the police, because understand that when a person is part and parcel to a crime and conspires to commit a crime, if they knew weren't true, they could have some exposure themselves. And so I'm not sure at this point what happened. You're not required to speak to the police. Apparently, they did in order to vindicate themselves, as we do believe, so that they can get out from, under whatever is here. But yes, in the event that there was some issue concerning them, being falsely detained as a result of this, that could present a problem civilly. We also have the question of restitution. What do I mean? If he's prosecuted for this, the police have expended resources. There's a fine of up to $25,000 that comes with this crime. To what extent might he be on the hook for what the police have done in terms of searching for people that did not exist? As it relates to the Fox issue, I think that's a separate question. The way that would be resolved, and Brian could address that certainly more clearly than I, is by essentially cutting him off. I don't think they would look to recoup any money from him, though.
Yeah, Brian, quickly to you, and you can address that, but also the outpouring of support for Jussie Smollett from Democratic presidential candidates, from the Speaker of the House, from high-ranking officials across the country, celebrities. Is there any residual damage for them for backing or believing the story if indeed it is false?
Oh, I think there is damage in the political sphere because this story became political within a few hours. Think back to the day of this alleged assault. TMZ was the first to report that it happened, and TMZ came out and said Jussie's telling his friends that the attacker said this is MAGA country, and they may have worn Trump hats or something, that this was political. Those connections to Trump came out right away. And absolutely outraged Trump supporters who said, how dare you claim that this was something that involved a Trump supporter? What was a Trump supporter doing on the streets of Chicago at 2 a.m. Trying to attack Jussie Smollett? It didn't make sense to a lot of people right away. And in fact, even the president's son, Donald Trump Jr., was out there casting doubt about this case right away. At the same time, the many Democratic presidential candidates and Democratic politicians were supporting Jussie Smollett and saying this was a lynching and saying this was absolutely a hate crime. There's that tension because this became political on day one. And I think there's going to be residual effects from that for sure. There is obviously a tension between wanting to believe and needing to believe victims and taking their account seriously versus the ability of someone to take advantage of that. And that may have been what happened here. We just don't know yet.
We'll see if any of those candidates, any of those politicians who initially released statements or said something on Twitter will now follow up. Brian Stelter, Joey Jackson, thank you both.
Thank you.
And be sure to catch Stelter's show later this morning on Reliable Sources, 11 Eastern, right here on CNN.
And when we come back, now hiring. Former Fox News anchor turned State Department spokeswoman Heather Nauert is forced to end her bid to become UN ambassador. We'll tell you why.
Plus, President Trump tells Europe to put more than 800 ISIS prisoners on trial, or otherwise, there's a good chance he's going to let them loose.
CNN Nauert hired a nanny who was not legally allowed to work in the U.S. and was not paying taxes. Officials say the nanny has since paid the taxes she owed. CNN national correspondent Kristen Holmes joins us from West Palm Beach. Good morning, Kristen. What more do we know about these circumstances?
Good morning, Kaylee. Well, this is a bit of a mess, and I'm actually going to take you through a timeline, and then I'll catch back up to you. So go back to October. Nikki Haley announces that she is going to leave the administration. She, of course, is the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. About 2 months later, President Trump says he has made his choice for this post. It's going to be State Department spokesperson Heather Nauert. Now, here's where it gets a little bit iffy. This nomination is never sent to the Senate, so this raises some eyebrows, but others think it's just a bureaucratic hang-up. This is, of course, Washington. Until last night, when we learned that Nauert had stepped away, she had asked to withdraw her name from consideration, and the State Department issued a statement on her behalf. We're going to pull it up for you here, and I'll read it to you. It says, "The past 2 months have been grueling for my family, and therefore it is in the best interest of my family that I withdraw my name from consideration." And now, Kaylee, we are all caught up because it was after this statement was issued that we learned about this nanny who was legally in the United States, but not legally allowed to work in the United States and not paying taxes. She had employed this nanny, Nauert had employed this nanny before she worked at the State Department, and it was not known while she was at the State Department that this had occurred. She did, however, disclose this information when she was tapped for this post. But even though those back taxes were paid, it became apparent in about the last week that this was going to cause a big problem for Nauert, and she agreed she needed to step aside. Now, you might be wondering how exactly it got this far. Well, we've learned from sources that President Trump actually made this announcement that he was going to pick Nauert before the White House had a chance to thoroughly vet her, which isn't that surprising. We know the president wants what he wants when he wants it. But in terms of what's next for Nauert, sources say she's not expected to return to her post at the State Department. We have, of course, reached out to her. We have not heard back. Kaylee?
Kristen Holmes, thank you.
So let's talk about this in and out of the Trump White House. The president's cabinet, there have been so many departures and then leaving temporary replacements. Nauert's withdrawal means that the Trump administration is now operating with no UN ambassador, no replacement on the way. Acting Secretary of Defense after James Mattis left the White House after claiming that his views did not align with the president's. And Acting Chief of Staff after President Trump announced John Kelly was leaving. The sources told CNN the president and Kelly were not on speaking terms and their relationship was no longer seen as tenable. An Acting Interior Secretary after Ryan Zinke resigned during those multiple ethics investigations. An Acting EPA Administrator after Scott Pruitt's resignation over ethics concerns as well. An Acting FEMA Administrator after Brock Long, he's scheduled to leave soon because of questions he misused government vehicles. Right now, the Trump administration has 6 positions, either unstaffed or filled with an acting administrator, chief of staff, director, secretary.
Thanks for laying that out, Victor. And joining me now, CNN political analyst Julian Zelzer and commentary writer and editor for the Washington Examiner, Siraj Hashmi. Good morning to you both. You just heard Victor lay that out. 6 positions in the administration unstaffed or filled with an acting head. And President Trump, he's tried to put a positive spin on the situation, saying that acting department heads give him more flexibility. Siraj, I come to you first. What downside do you see to this situation, this revolving door that keeps spinning?
Well, right now, the main situation is finding people who actually align with President Trump on his agenda. And that's obviously been very difficult given the case with Jim Mattis and even people like Nikki Haley. There are many people in the Trump camp who believe that Nikki Haley did not align 100% with President Trump's views and actually saw her as a threat in the future. You know, there are many people who are considering that she might even run in 2020, given the fact that she's become so popular in her position as the UN ambassador. But yes, this is a very serious issue with the Trump administration. It means he can't fully implement his agenda. And that's become obviously a very giant burden on him because he then has to circumvent the legislative process to say go with something like a national emergency to build a border wall because he doesn't have the people in place to give him the best advice on what he should be doing.
Julian, can you give us some historical perspective? How unusual is this to have this type of leadership void?
This is very unusual. Every administration has moments where you have turnover among high-level officials, or you might have a void in one position temporarily. But these 6 positions come on top of 2 years where there's been immense instability and turnover that is unprecedented in terms of scale and scope from what we've seen in other presidencies. So this creates a vacuum of expertise around the president. It also hurts congressional relations in that cabinet leaders are usually the point person with members of Congress on their issue areas. And I think this reflects the kind of presidency we have right now.
And a U.S. UN official tells CNN there's angst among the staff there with so much uncertainty at the top there, which brings us back to Heather Nauert. Siraj, the president announced her nomination before the White House did a thorough vet of her, reminiscent of the nomination of Dr. Ronny Jackson when they wanted him to head Veterans Affairs, a different situation, but similar in the lack of that vetting process. Shouldn't that process be done before the administration nominates someone for a cabinet position, before the president makes that announcement?
Absolutely. You know, the White House in many ways has kind of failed in that regard in terms of thoroughly vetting their candidates. You know, there are many candidates actually right now who are serving as current U.S. ambassadors, like Richard Grenell in Germany, and you even have the acting UN ambassador Jonathan Cohen, who has also served in the role since January. But both of them were confirmed by the Senate. And actually Cohen, who's the acting UN ambassador, was unanimously confirmed. So he was already vetted in a public forum as a Senate confirmation hearing. So, yeah, you know, there are many people who are actually qualified for the position. But I think, you know, with President Trump's sort of his go-to to looking at people who have been on TV, like John Bolton, who is now his national security advisor, and Heather Nauert, who was a Fox News presenter for several years, or many years, actually. You know, I think he's avoiding trying to go with people that he knows are qualified for the job, and that's been more or less, well, very problematic, as a matter of fact.
So to Nauert's problem here, at the core, saying she employed a nanny who was in the U.S. legally but not legally allowed to work. She didn't pay taxes but paid those back taxes. Julian, do you think there's more to Nauert's withdrawal than this nanny issue?
I think there is. I mean, that is an important issue. That goes back to Bill Clinton when he appointed an Attorney General, Zoe Baird, and she withdrew for similar reasons. But it wasn't the vetting that's the only problem here. It was actually who Nauert is and her resume. This was not a traditional pick for UN ambassador. Usually you have either a politician like Adlai Stevenson or Henry Lodge, or you have someone with deep diplomatic experience like Richard Holbrooke, and this was neither. This was a TV personality about to take on the position. And I think that was going to be pretty contentious, even with some Republicans on the Hill. This is a key moment in U.S. relations abroad, and it wasn't clear this was the person to handle the job.
And quick to you, Siraj, what are you hearing about who President Trump is considering to be the next UN ambassador?
Well, as I just said, Jonathan Cohen, who's the acting UN ambassador, he's a very qualified pick. He may not be on the short list. Richard Grenell, who actually served under the Bush administration, Bush 43, from 2001 to 2008, in the United Nations, is probably the top pick right now. There's also Kelly Craft, who is the UN ambassador to Canada. U.S. ambassador to Canada, and then Jamie McCourt, who's the U.S. ambassador to France. Those are the top three picks right now. I can see Grenell getting the pick right now because he's been a very supportive and vocal supporter of President Trump.
Yeah, the White House taking applications, 6 spots that need to be filled. Julian, Siraj, thank you both.
Thank you.
This morning, Acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan will start looking for funding sources for the president's border wall. You'll remember the president declared a national emergency on Friday. Now, the administration has said a total of $6.1 billion will be diverted from the military to pay for the wall. Shanahan will have the final say on how much will be taken from which programs. A military official says he's likely to approve $3.6 billion from the construction budgets.
We're calling this next story Mike Pence's awkward pregnant pause. Stay with me here. The scene is set, standing at the podium in a room full of U.S. allies. And the vice president announces a warm greeting from his boss. The reaction, not quite what he expected.
I bring greetings from the 45th President of the United States of America, President Donald Trump. Last August.
So there you have it, the 5-second pause for applause that just never happened. Tough crowd, Victor.
Yeah, President Trump has declared a national emergency for his border wall, splitting Congress and his own party. Will this work? Senator Sherrod Brown plus House Intelligence Chairman Adam Schiff are going to weigh in on State of the Union this morning at 9 Eastern with Jake Tapper.
And ahead, President Trump demands Europe take back 800 ISIS fighters captured in Syria or face consequences if they're released.
President Trump is warning European countries that they have to either take back more than 800 ISIS fighters captured in Syria, put them on trial, or the U.S. will be forced to release them.
CNN senior international correspondent Ben Wiedemann is live from eastern Syria. Ben.
Yes, Kaylee, Victor, this tweet by President Trump has aroused a good deal of consternation among officials from the Syrian Democratic Forces, those U.S.-backed Kurdish and Arab fighters who have been key in this war against ISIS. They point out, first of all, that it is not the United States that is holding these 800 prisoners, mostly ISIS fighters, many of them from Western Europe, but rather it is the Syrian Democratic Forces who are holding them, and therefore it's not the United States that can let them go or release them. The Kurds who run this part of the country are very eager to have those countries from which these individuals come from to take them back. Not only are there more than 800 very dangerous, battle-hardened fighters currently in their custody, but there are also thousands of family members, many of them little children, who are in limbo. Many of them are in a camp north of here that has as many as 40,000 people in them. The camp is filled to the brim. More than 50 children have died there as a result of cold and diseases. So it's something of a crisis in this part of the country as this campaign to eradicate the physical presence of ISIS continues. Now, we also saw that President Trump is telling European allies that they have to step up and replace the Americans here. It is also worth pointing out that there, in fact, are British and French special forces on the front, on the ground. We've seen them in the battle. And everyone seems to be playing a part, but it does appear that President Trump is basically giving an ultimatum. Either these European countries completely step up and replace the Americans, or these 800 very dangerous people could simply be let go. And we know what they are capable of doing, having seen terrorist attacks in France, Belgium, Germany, and elsewhere. Victor, Kaylee?
All right, Ben Wiedemann for us there in eastern Syria. Ben, thank you so much.
Well, a second wave of aid arrived at the Colombian-Venezuelan border this weekend. Supplies included food and hygiene kits that can help about 25,000 people who've been struggling there. Venezuela's self-declared interim president, Juan Guaido, urged thousands of volunteers to help get aid into the country. Meanwhile, President Trump is expected to give a speech on Venezuela in Miami tomorrow in support of Guaido.
Protests in Haiti are on a brief pause while people gather food and water and fuel. After more than a week of riots and violence, protesters are demanding the country's president and prime minister resign. Miguel Marquez has the latest from Port-au-Prince.
For 9 days, Haitians took to the streets fighting with police, lighting fires, tires on fire, creating roadblocks across the city, essentially shutting down the main city here, Port-au-Prince, for 9 days. In the last 24 hours, there has been a lull, a very tense lull at the very best. People basically looking for the very basics of life: food, gas, and water, all of them in short supply. Throughout the city, large crowds of Haitians gathered looking for water. Gas stations were, for the most part, shut across the entire city. The ones that were open were just were heavily trafficked by both those in motorcycles and cars. People just looking for the ability to fill up their tank so they can get to work, assuming that things get back to normal here in the city in the next couple of days. Protesters want the president to resign. They say they will not accept anything else. They say that he is implicated in a broad corruption scheme that has engulfed the country. They say that not only must the president resign, but that the country itself has to go back to tabula rasa, as they say, erase everything, go back to the Constitution, and start all over again. Back to you.
Well, up next, he's dedicated his life to creating crosses to remember the lives of those lost to gun violence. Now, a man from Aurora, Illinois, is making 5 more crosses for his hometown. People killed in a workplace shooting in Aurora, Illinois, have now been released.
And the man who lives in Aurora has made it his mission to make sure the victims are never forgotten. Here's CNN's Scott McLean.
For more than 2 decades, 68-year-old Greg Zanis has been hand-making and hand-delivering comfort to grieving families across America. It's a big job that takes a lot of lumber, a lot of paint, and countless nights inside of his truck.
I'm the kind of guy that falls asleep real easy.
It's not comfortable, but neither is the task at hand.
Most people don't want to think about these shootings until they happen on their doorsteps. But you live at 365. Why?
I just feel that it's making a difference.
He's placed his wooden crosses at Columbine, Sandy Hook, Sutherland Springs, Texas, Orlando's Pulse nightclub, Las Vegas, Parkland, Florida, and that's barely scratching the surface. In total,
26,579. You have no idea what I've seen in this country.
He's seen America at its worst, yet still believes in its best.
We're in a country that's so full of hope.
In every place he hears people say they never thought it could happen here. Even he believed that until Friday.
I feel so dumb that I wasn't even thinking that it could happen here. I should have thought it could happen here.
Just 3 miles from his home in Aurora, Illinois, a man opened fire on his colleagues after learning he'd been let go. 5 people were killed. The next day, Zanis left 5 crosses bearing their names.
My heart rate was going up because I can't believe I'm standing on the ground here in my town doing this. That's all. On my dirt, my town. You know, like, it's like a nightmare.
Following each tragedy, Zanis takes comfort in the fact that he can get in his truck and leave.
I put on like I'm strong, like I'm carrying the whole weight of the world on my shoulders, because I know that I'm going to be in and out.
Just not this time.
That's why I'm having such a hard time here, living here, because I'm not in and out.
This time, it's a much heavier cross to bear. Scott McLean, CNN, Aurora, Illinois.
Thanks to Scott for that story. Democratic contenders are now stepping up for gun control legislation after the shooting in Illinois. One of those contenders, Senator Amy Klobuchar. And tomorrow night, Don Lemon moderates a CNN presidential town hall in New Hampshire with the 2020 presidential candidate. She will answer voters' questions and talk about what she hopes will be next for the country. That's Monday night at 10 Eastern, right here on CNN.
Colin Kaepernick has set out the NFL for 2 years, but Andy Scholes, could he be signed in a matter of weeks?
Well, Kaylee, now that Kaepernick's collusion case with the NFL is over, his attorney predicts he will be on an NFL roster soon. And coming up, we'll hear which teams his attorney says he could sign with.
His lawyer says yes, and it could happen soon. Andy Scholes is in Charlotte for the NBA All-Star game. We're starting with football, though. How realistic is this, and which teams potentially?
Well, I'll tell you what, as you mentioned, Colin Kaepernick has not played in the NFL since the 2016 season, but his attorney, Mark Geragos, he says Kaepernick is in great shape. He's ready to play, and Geragos came on CNN last night, and he said now that Kaepernick's collusion grievance with the NFL has been settled, he expects Kaepernick to be on an NFL roster soon.
I think you're going to see, I'll make the bold prediction, you can save the tape. I think you're going to see within the next 2 weeks that somebody's going to step up, somebody's going to do the right thing. You want me to predict too? I will tell you, besides the Panthers, it would not surprise me if Bob Kraft makes a move.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I would. That would not surprise me. And it would not surprise me if his former coach, I'll test your knowledge, also makes a move.
Now, Geragos possibly referring to Pete Carroll, who coaches the Seattle Seahawks now. So that would give you the Panthers, Patriots, and the Seahawks as possible destinations for Kaepernick. We'll see if Geragos' prediction comes true. Now, LeBron James, meanwhile, has never shied away from speaking out on social issues, and he's always supported Colin Kaepernick and what he was trying to accomplish. And yesterday, here in Charlotte, LeBron said he was thrilled when he learned the news that Kaepernick had settled his case with the NFL.
I stand with Cap. I kneel with Cap. I just feel what he was talking about, nobody wanted to listen to. Nobody ever really wanted to actually understand where he was coming from, and, I think that anybody that will sacrifice their livelihood for the better of all of us, I can respect that, and he's done it. And I hope that, the word of what he did will live on throughout American history, but also world history, because it's important for all of us, not only African Americans, but for everybody that want to stand up for something that's more important than them.
Now, the All-Star festivities here in Charlotte continuing last night with the skills competitions and the dunk contest. It was rather anticlimactic, but there was one fantastic dunk last night by the Thunder's Amadou Diallo. He jumps over Shaq, puts his entire forearm into the rim. Just an incredible dunk. He got a perfect score from the judges. Diallo would go on to beat Dennis Smith Jr. to be your slam dunk champion for 2019. The NBA stars are going to take center stage later tonight for the annual All-Star game. It's going to get going at 8 Eastern on our sister station TNT. Guys, Team LeBron versus Team Giannis. They went with the drafted format again this year. And if it's anything like last year's game, we should expect another great one.
You think Team LeBron is really just a recruiting technique for the Lakers?
He did draft a lot of free agents.
What a coincidence.
For the upcoming offseason. Yeah.
Man, last night, a good night to be a University of Kentucky fan. Hami, who won the dunk contest, a Kentucky product, and that basketball team back in Lexington got a win over the #1 team in the country, Tennessee. Not a bad deal.
Good day. Andy, thank you. Up next, he's back. Alec Baldwin pokes fun at President Trump's national emergency on SNL.
We need war, okay? We have a tremendous amount of drugs flowing into this country from the southern border, or the brown line, as many people have asked me not to call it.
When is the next supermoon? No, I wasn't. I really was not thinking that. But apparently there are supermoons all the time now.
It's called a super snow moon this time around, happening this week. CNN's meteorologist Allison Chinchar is here. Allison, last month there was that super blood moon that apparently Victor was just fascinated by.
Wolfie or something?
But now this month, this super snow moon. What's going on? What do we need to understand about this?
Yeah, so the whole point is to keep Victor on his toes by naming him something different every time. Yes, the last one was the super blood wolf moon. This one is the super snow moon. Okay, now it's really going to take place on Tuesday. That's going to be the best time to view. So when you were looking up at the sky at the moon, it's actually going to appear not only bigger, but brighter. And that's where the term super moon actually comes from. Basically, all it means is it's the full moon, but it's timed when the moon is actually at its closest approach to the Earth. That's what makes it appear bigger and brighter. Now, the name snow moon, well, that's what we call the full moon that takes place in February. Victor, I know you wanted to know, next super moon will be the super worm moon. Figured you'd want to know that.
Why?
The thing is, I know, they all just come up with different names. They've got a bunch of different ones, but